Hi, everybody. Welcome back to 10 Minutes with Griffin. I'm your host, Griffin Bridgers. For today's episode, episode 143, we're going to take a step back from a more technical discussion, and I'm going to do something I've done in some other episodes, but not as much, and dive into, more of a business and psychology type of discussion. And really what I want to discuss today is the question, so you want to start an estate planning practice? Just because, as we're going to see, this is a question on many people's minds, especially with everything going on with COVID. But estate planning is not always sunshine and rainbows. And what I want to do is kind of shine light on some of the blind spots that a lot of people don't consider when they're looking at whether or not they should branch into estate planning. Now, as always, this presentation is not intended to substitute for legal or tax advice and is provided for educational purposes only. So, as I mentioned, COVID has opened eyes as to some of the realities of legal practice and whether or not they continue to serve us. Working long hours in an office, having your worth determined by your billable hours, and dealing with the headaches that come with high stakes disputes, whether they be in litigation or transactional matters. And work-life balance is top of mind, but also just kind of mental balance and emotional balance, and whether those are possible in legal practice. And out of that has emerged the question of, maybe estate planning practices can relieve me of some of these stresses, that it'll create a much better work-life balance for me. And generally, it's true that estate planning does have better work-life balance compared to other practice areas. But there is a counterpoint to everything, and really what I want to do today is kind of show you, the honest perspective of an estate planning attorney who's been in many firm settings, small firm, boutique, large firm, regional firm, and show you kind of what I've learned along the process in terms of what are the blind spots that you're not seeing. What are you underestimating when you go into an estate planning practice? Now, one is the knowledge base. As an estate planner, you have to maintain a very broad knowledge base, and it's very easy to underestimate that reality. And it can be an ego thing too. When you're dealing with a client, you really want to land the new business, but it's hard to say, I don't know. And it can be even harder to swallow your pride and say, I don't know and I'm not comfortable handling this, so I must refer you to a colleague at another firm. I think before you engage in any estate planning practice, you have to be comfortable doing both of those things. And if you're not, it's really easy to get yourself in trouble. There's an increased liability risk when you bite off more than you can chew, especially if you don't have a peer who can check your work or who you can bounce ideas off of and who can also check for errors in documents that you draft. Now, what I think is unaddressed in the entire estate planning field is that the knowledge gaps aren't even always legal. Some may be related to ancillary areas like sales and business and even family psychology. So in the future, estate planners may have to really take on advanced knowledge in non-legal areas like family disputes and maybe even things like wealth management, as the lines continue to be blurred in what an estate planner does and where we seek to have a more holistic service model. Now, as with any firm, there's always the issue and question of keeping the lights on. Now, in estate planning, possibly more than any other practice area, what I've observed is that the traditional billable hour model and associate leveraging are becoming less and less effective. Now, that may be the case in a lot of practice areas, but it's really exacerbated in estate planning. It's hard to hit an 1,800 billable hour per year type of expectation, especially as a younger attorney, unless you're lucky enough to be in a larger firm or a boutique where you're handling, for example, ultra high net worth clients where your engagements might be in the 25,000 or more range, or where you're doing estate planning as part of, large mergers and acquisitions, or where you're assisting on high-profile estate litigation cases. And with all of these types of engagements, these are higher stress. These don't lend themselves to work-life balance. And if you're not taking on large matters, estate planning is going to require a lot of volume. You have to get a lot of new clients in the door. And you might get repeat clients, but usually the repeat nature of changes isn't going to generate the same level of fees as the initial estate planning drafting projects. So with that volume comes a misunderstood skill set. With an estate planner, a lot of what you do is project management. There's a much greater need for organization, and that organizational time may not be billable, or really it shouldn't be. I'm not saying people don't build that into their fee, but that is an issue out there where a lot of what you're doing is really organizing a client's affairs because they don't want to or don't know how to. And obviously fees and billing are their own discussion, which I won't get into here other than a brief mention ahead with emotional disputes. But it's also important to note that there's a lot more chance of having emotionally charged engagements. So if you're fleeing something like litigation out of the belief that, hey, maybe I'm not going to have to deal with angry clients or angry attorneys anymore, you may be mistaken. For example, you may be dealing with clients who have urgent needs due to maybe declining health, and you could end up with having to go above and beyond, getting an estate plan done in the 11th hour, going to a hospital to help sign it in front of a client, and those can be difficult situations to be in view. You may also end up dealing with interfamily disputes. That obviously arises at death, but could also happen in situations where you have a child who inserts themselves too much into their parents' affairs or vice versa. And even if there's no litigation on the line, you may end up dealing with many stakeholders, and it can be very easy to blur the lines and step out of the fact that you represent a client and you don't represent the child who's raising a fuss. And in the worst case, I'll even say I've dealt with threats of physical harm as an estate planner, and that's something that hangs out there. So you need to know that that's a risk. So if you're conflict averse, you may not be able to escape conflict completely through an estate planning practice, and that seems natural to say, oh yeah, it won't be an issue. I'm a special snowflake and that won't apply to me. I'm here to tell you it doesn't. You pretty much it's a universal experience that you're going to run into these types of conflicts in estate planning. And what's worse is they're not always related to money. They're more emotional. So people may be willing to go scorched earth and burn down the estate, even if it means they get nothing, in exchange for making sure that their siblings who they're adverse to also receive nothing. And the fee and billing component itself can also cause a lot of issues. It's hard to vet clients, especially when you need to get new business in the door and you lack the economic stability to turn down work. But it's the problem clients who aren't willing to pay your fees who can cause a lot of headaches. Now there is, as I mentioned, more work-life balance generally in estate planning because you're not having to work as many hours. Really, you drive your revenue by how many estate plans you prepare and how much you do on the probate side if you do that. But while you can reduce your billable work, you do have an increased need to sell and network. Estate planning is a volume-driven process. So a lot of your time is going to be spent outside of the office trying to generate new client relationships or new referral relationships, or maybe in the office trying to do digital marketing. So if you're not a people person, there's many ways you can build a practice, but it takes a lot more work than what people anticipate in terms of building your personal brand. And there's a lot of psychology that plays into this too. When it comes to selling, that even though there's a huge need for estate planning, a lot of potential clients just don't want to think about dying. So there's a different sales skill set needed to convince clients to take action than you might have with a more traditional area that directly affects them. It's easy for somebody to cynically say, I'll be dead, I don't need to worry about this, and I don't care if I impose a mess on my family if I can just live in my blissful fantasy now of ignoring that. And that can be a hard barrier to crack if you're dealing with a potential client. And a lot of people underestimate that when they take on estate planning as a practice area. Now, in estate planning, there's a lot of tools available and a lot of vendors for billing, drafting, marketing, practice management. The sky is the limit. But there's a ton of opportunistic people who try to prey on estate planners when it comes to practice assistance and services. And it's easy to fall victim to pitches which seem to quote unquote guarantee you clients, because with a guarantee also comes potential economic or even ethical issues that can arise. I see a lot of bad services and bad vulture-like people out there who try to prey on estate planners. And they try to pitch a lot of things that you just don't need, or that really don't add value to your practice, because much like you might misunderstand estate planning, I can guarantee that the vendors also misunderstand estate planning and the specific needs of your practice and your clients. It can be lonely as well. A lot of estate planners practice in solo firms, and in doing so, you might lack peers that you would otherwise have in a large firm. And even in a large firm, it can be easy to end up being an island without much mentorship or support. Now, there are bar associations and communities, and it's good to get involved in them, but there can be a lot of gatekeeping in these groups. And I say this just as a personal experience. A lot of the estate planning community tends to, be dominated by a lot of more established practitioners who have their way of doing things, and they want to gatekeep who really comes in as a younger attorney and gets involved in those types of groups. And that could be frustrating to deal with and to try to earn the trust of the more established practitioners in your area. So, long story short, estate planning can be a very rewarding practice, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. What I hope I've emphasized through this presentation is that if you want to take on estate planning as a new practice area or as your sole practice area, you have to do your homework. There's a lot of education involved. There's a lot of business and sales and psychology considerations that you may be ignoring. Now, ultimately, the true mark of an entrepreneur is finding something you're willing to do for free. So I think it's helpful within estate planning to look at, what are you passionate about? What areas of estate planning would you be willing to do for free? And I'm not saying you need to do them for free. It's more that it's going to be those areas that really fill your tank and give you that true work-life balance that really creates a rewarding practice at the end of the day. And for the things you're not willing to do for free, you may have to look at, am I willing to pay somebody else to do those things? And ultimately, niching and conviction and being clear on your value proposition, the why, what, and how, are going to be key to building a successful practice. So thank you for listening if you've gotten to this point. I know that was a non-technical discussion, and I could speak for days on this topic. So there's a lot of follow-up I could do from this, and I may develop this topic a little bit more in the future. But for the time being, if you have questions or topic suggestions, you can email those to me at griffin.bridgers@gmail.com. But thank you for listening to this episode of 10 Minutes with Griffin, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.